Yatornana Birhidayat
Yatornana Birhidayat
Yatornana Birhidayat
Yatornana Birhidayat
Purnam Santatya Vaktrataha
Purnam Santatya Vaktrataha
Purnam Santatya Vaktrataha
Purnam Santatya Vaktrataha
Taya Viritya Bhuyastam
Daya Viritya Bhuyastam
Taya Viritya Bhuyastam
Daya Viritya Bhuyastam
Grasatyevam Maheshwaraha
Rasatyevam Maheshwaraha
Grasatyevam Maheshwaraha
Rasatyevam Maheshwaraha
Purnanapi
Purnanapi
the spider
the spider
Hridayat
Hridayat
from within himself
from within himself
Purnam
Purnam
thread
thread
Santatya
Santatya
expanding
expanding
Vaktrataha
Vaktrataha
from his mouth
from his mouth
Taya
Taya
with that thread
with that thread
Viritya
Viritya
enjoying
enjoying
Bhuya
Bhuya
again
again
Tam
Tam
that thread
that thread
Rasati
Rasati
he swallows
swallows
Evam
Evam
in the same way
in the same way
Mahishvaraha
Maheshwaraha
the Supreme Lord
the Supreme Lord
Translation Translation and purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Just as from within himself the spider expands thread through his mouth, plays with it for some time, and eventually swallows it, similarly the Supreme Personality of Godhead expands his personal potency from within himself. Thus, the Lord displays the network of cosmic manifestation, utilizes it according to his purpose, and eventually withdraws it completely within himself. You can repeat.
Just as within himself, the spider expands thread through his mouth, plays with it for some time, and eventually swallows it. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead expands his personal potency from within himself. Thus the Lord displays the network of cosmic manifestation, utilizes it according to his purpose, and eventually withdraws it completely within himself.
One who is intelligent obtains spiritual knowledge even from an insignificant creature like the spider. Thus, transcendental knowledge is visible everywhere for one whose eyes are opened in Krishna consciousness. So these are examples which are the realizations of the Avadut Brahman. And as the purport says, we should always look for enlightenment in all circumstances. Those who are materialistic see only the material world, but those who are spiritualists see the hidden hand of the Lord acting in all circumstances. God may not be visible to a gross materialist, but his presence is always felt by those who are devotees. It takes a very foolish person to reason or to logically conclude that all of this material cosmic creation could possibly be the result of some blind laws, or even more strangely, the result of chance. There is such precision, there is such order, there is such meaning behind everything that there must be a supreme intelligent being. It's ridiculous to assume differently, and yet even the supposedly most intelligent people think that there is no God behind everything. There's one Nobel laureate whose findings are quoted in the Origins magazine. His name is Crick. quick. So he has put out a book called The Origin of Life. And in this book he concludes that there is no way that life could have originated on this planet, which is a very reasonable conclusion. So you would think that he would therefore conclude that ultimately, originally, life comes from life. Actually, he does conclude that. He says that the life on this planet came originally from another universe beyond this cosmos, from intelligent beings there who sent a spacecraft with microbial life and released it in the atmosphere of the Earth. And he's so dishonest that he attacks all religious people, saying that it's so absurd to think that God created life on this planet. But he never answers the question of who created the intelligent beings who sent the spacecraft. He never even deals with that. It is so duplicitous in this book. It's such an obvious omission on his part to explain that, and yet he doesn't explain it, and he's the discoverer, co-discoverer of DNA and RNA. He's a big, very good Nobel laureate. So their envy makes it impossible for them to understand. Just like you read in the Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter, 1st verse, that Krishna tells Arjuna that I'm going to make all of this knowledge understandable to you because you are non-envious. I'm not sure you are. Because you are not envious of me. Therefore, you will be able to understand. And again, in the 4th chapter, Bhaktosi me Sakacheti, Arjuna, I'm explaining this to you because of your devotion and friendship to me. So there must be qualification for higher understanding. Even in material education, one has to gradually qualify oneself to be able to take other courses. Just like in a university, they have so many different college courses. You know, chemistry 1, chemistry 2, German 1, German 2, all the different levels of education. You have to gradually progress through the stages. So to understand God takes some qualification. In the Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, text 28, Krishna says that when one's sinful activities are completely stopped, and he is only engaged in pious activity, then he can understand the meaning of devotional service. So therefore, the first qualification is that one must stop being sinful. And that is why we demand that people give up these 4 sinful activities. Otherwise, Krishna is Pavitram. He is all pure, the supreme pure. And he cannot be approached by those who are impure. Just as during the time of Lord Krishna 5,000 years ago, very few persons could actually recognize Krishna's Godship, you could say. Prabhupada said that very few actually understood the position of Krishna. When he entered into the assembly of the Kurus, they could not understand. You know, and at that time, when he said, I don't think you should fight, why don't you give, he was sent as a messenger, why don't you give something small to the Pandavas? And Duryodhana said, no, never. And it was pointed out, you don't understand who Krishna is, but they could not understand. So, we also have difficulty understanding. When we used to see Prabhupada, he would always question, are you convinced that Krishna is the Supreme Lord? So, it's not so simple to be so convinced. People claim that they believe in God, but when you press them as to who God is, then you find that they don't really believe in God. They believe in some idea or some conception, some impersonal conception, but they don't believe in God as a supreme transcendental personality who they have to love and surrender to and serve with their heart and soul. They don't have that belief. So the position of a Vaishnava is very exalted because beyond just believing in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's engaged in loving devotional service to the Lord. He knows the Lord. By the grace of Krishna, he understands who Krishna is. Krishna reveals himself to his devotee. So, the workings of the Lord are very mysterious, but they are unfolded and explained to his devotees. Otherwise, it's not possible to understand that. Apajanati manuddha manushinda manushutam param bhavam janato mamabhuta maheshwaram. Foolish persons cannot understand Krishna. Yoga Maya Salamrita. Krishna covers himself by his curtain of Maya. They will never understand. So, just for example, this statement here that we are discussing today, it is an example of Krishna's transcendental position. How he creates and how he withdraws the material cosmic creation is being described with a very simple example. It's extraordinary how the Bhagavatam and the personalities in the Bhagavatam are able to make the most complex subject grasp in the most simple of examples. Everyone knows the example of a spider. Everyone sitting here has watched a spider dangling off the ceiling, and then, slowly you see the little line of the spider web coming down, and then after a while sometimes you see them go up, right? And you wonder, where did he put all that? Did he put it in his pocket? Or you watch them go up and down. Actually, it's the saliva of the spider. The spider web is made from his saliva, and he draws it out, and then he can swallow it back in, and he can make a whole network. Sometimes you see how the spiders go, make this very complex, intricate network web. So he does it with his energy, and in the same way, Krishna has his energies. Krishna's energies are very many. Parasya Shakti, Videva Shriyate, Bhagavati, Jnana, Bala, Kriya Shakti. These are only some. Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti, these are some of the energy. But God, actually, Krishna has unlimited energies, of which only certain energies are considered to be principal energies. Everything is made of the energy of God. In that sense, Sarvakavidam Brahma, that this statement is true, that everything is Brahma. The person will say, everything is Brahma. Actually, everything is Brahma. Everything is spirit. So a devotee, the only thing the devotee knows that everything is spirit, but Krishna is part of Brahma. Everything is Brahma, but Krishna is part of Brahma. We are spirit, Aham Brahmasmi. And Krishna is spirit. He is also. But there's a difference between Krishna and the living entity, because he is the supreme spirit. So he expands his whole creation from his energy. And therefore, one who is actually advanced, he can understand this 9th chapter, text 4, Bhagavad Gita, where it says, Maya Savat, what is that? Maya Nidam Savat. Maya Tamidam Sarva. Jagata Vyapta Murtina. This statement of Krishna, that everything is coming from me. I am everywhere, and yet everything is not in me. And yet I am aloof from everything. Very nice statements of Krishna. This is very bewildering. How can Krishna be everywhere, and yet he says he's not in everything, and he says he's beyond everything? So this has to be explained. First of all, Krishna is everywhere in the form of his energy. Just like the example is given that a businessman expands his business in so many ways. He has his representatives, his office, his vehicles, his bank balances, his properties, so many different things. And in one sense, this is all part of the business, so it's all part of his energy. And he's present everywhere through this energy. We can say he's, just like you see one of his cars, supposedly it's called, Mr. Goody. And there goes one of Mr. Goody's trucks. And there's Mr. Goody's factory. And there's a representative of Mr. Goody. And then on and on. This man is seen through his energy. At the same time, this gentleman who owns the factory and the business, he's aloof from it all. At the same time, he's aloof from everything. He may be on the golf course playing golf, while all of his energies are expanded everywhere. So he's in everything, and yet he's not there. Because in one sense, no one part of the business is equal to him. He is always more than any aspect of his business. In fact, he's more than his business in its entirety. So although Krishna is everywhere in all of the creation through his energies, at the same time all the energies put together still cannot equal Krishna. Because he's also independent of his energies. He is the source of all energies. He is the Purush, and the energies are called Prakriti. So, Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. We worship Krishna as Govinda, who's the Adi Purush. The supreme Purusha means the supreme enjoyer. And that's also significant. That it mentions here that he, as the spider expands through his mouth and plays with it for some time, similarly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the word is used here, viritya. He is enjoying it. This example is very nice. That as the spider enjoys or plays, similarly the entire creation is also the play of the Lord. It is the play of the Lord. So sometimes people challenge us that what kind of God is this? That he takes some kind of vicarious pleasure in seeing us suffer. That doesn't seem like a very compassionate, merciful God. But actually he doesn't. Krishna's real activity is different. He expands his material creation through his energies, not personally. Just like it's explained that he is, in the Brahma Samhita it explains, that Krishna is always enjoying with his internal potency, Ramadevi. So he is personally, the example is given that a king may have a number of queens. So he's with the supreme internal pleasure potency. Originally Krishna was Srimati Radharani. And he's with his extensions of Srimati Radharani in the form of the gopis and the queens, the internal potency. And there's also the external energy, Maya. But Krishna doesn't personally enjoy with Maya. Although she's one of his energies, he doesn't contact her. He has these other wives who are his internal potency, but the external potency he doesn't contact. So what happens? Sometimes he knows that she's also one of his energies. She also wants to be activated. So he wakes her up, he glances at her, and that glance is called Shambhu, or Lord Shiva. And it is Lord Shiva who directly contacts Maya or Durga. But Krishna doesn't. The Supreme Lord is always beyond the external energy. He has no contact directly with the external energy. So this material world is, in a sense, the thought or the dream of the Lord in Yoga Nidra. It is a dreaming state of the Lord. In his activated state, he is always interacting with the internal potency. But in his dreaming state, the external energy interacts with Shambhu, and his whole material creation is made. So, now sometimes we see that the Lord enters within the material creation, seemingly enters, just like we see that Krishna appeared 5,000 years ago. However, when he comes, he brings his entourage with him. Doesn't come alone, and he also expands his spiritual world, his Dham. Therefore we say Vrindavan Dham, Mathura Dham, Dwarka Dham, Kurukshetra Dham. The places where the Lord appears, the persons whom the Lord interacts with, these are not material. They are not material. And if they appear to be material, it is only due to vision of the materialist. Because the Lord never has contact with the material world. He is always transcendental. Just like it seems that Krishna doesn't leave Vrindavan. Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. Krishna is always in it, but it seems like Krishna left Vrindavan. So we have to understand all of these things with the help of the Acharyas. Now you may say, it is a question of blind faith. Because Krishna did have a body, and Krishna was in this world. So how can you argue that it has nothing to do with this material energy in the material world? Actually, it doesn't. Because if you see what Krishna did, then you will understand that he could not enact these things through the material energy. No one with a material body can expand himself 16,000 times to be simultaneously present with every queen in Dwarka. No one with a material body can dance with each and every gopi. No one with a material body can do any of the things that Krishna did. Because Krishna's body is never material. Ajopisham avyakam bhutan mishradopisham prakritam shramadishtaya sambhavami atmamaya. Krishna's body is transcendental. And similarly, his internal potency is also spiritual. And she makes all the arrangements for him. So, the example is a material example, the spider. But we have to understand that it's just to show us how everything is contained within the Lord. The entire creation comes from his being. And when he wishes to, he winds it up. And none of these things affect him personally. We are totally affected. We are so insignificant and small that we are swept up, birth after birth, through this material creation. But Krishna is transcendental, and his eternal associates are transcendental. They also don't see the suffering of birth and death. These eternal associates of the Lord, like Arjuna and the Pandavas, and all the personalities interacting with Krishna, they are arranged by Krishna to come within this world, whenever he comes, and to go within every universe, wherever he goes. And they are not subjected to the laws of material nature. They don't go through the discomfort of birth and death, as ordinary persons do. In the Bhagavad Gita it's mentioned that there are the eternally liberated Jivan Mukta souls, and there are the conditioned souls, Nitya Pada. Nitya Mukta and Nitya Pada. Those who are eternally liberated and those who are eternally conditioned souls. And beyond those two is the Supreme Lord himself. So, we have to understand, therefore, that there's a distinction between those who, like the Supreme Lord and his associates, and we. It's just as there's a difference between this world, which is wound up and then it is destroyed after a certain time, and the spiritual world, Krishna says, which is never destroyed. So, understanding the Lord and the Lord's energies, this is described as the complete truth, the absolute truth. Just like in the Chaitanya Chaitamrita, the absolute truth is described in 6 features. Bande Gurum Isha Bhakta, Isha Vatarakam. What is the rest of that verse? Tat Prakasham Chatat Shakti, Krishna Chaitanya Samashtakam. These 6 different features of the Supreme Lord. There's a first verse of the Chaitanya Chaitamrita. And each one of these, putting them all together, that is God. That is God, the subject of God. So if we want to study the subject of God, then we have to very studiously look at each of the different aspects and understand them all, then we can understand the Supreme Lord. So this is the purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Chaitamrita. Chaitanya Chaitamrita and Srimad Bhagavatam have the same purpose. Chaitanya Chaitamrita is simply the quotations from the Bhagavatam and other authoritative Vedic literatures. But the basic subject of the Bhagavatam are these subjects. To understand the Lord, the Lord in the form of the spiritual masters, the Lord in the form of the devotees, the Lord in the form of his incarnations, the Lord in the form of his expansions, the Lord in the form of his energies, and the Lord himself in his feature as Bhagavan. This is all knowledge. Everything is contained within this. So, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Chaitamrita, by regular study, we will understand all of these subjects very nicely. And what is the result? We become enlightened. Just like last night it was asked, what is the basis of enthusiasm? The basis of enthusiasm is this subject matter. It is described that the sign of one who is advanced, Srimatan Sakata Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtana. This is the sign that one is constantly engaged in hearing and chanting the glories of Krishna. The glories of Krishna means this transcendental philosophy, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. But the basis of enthusiasm is to understand more and more about the Lord. The more we understand, then when we see the form of the deity, we become so enlightened. Because we understand the Supreme Person, who is so highly qualified in so many ways, he has taken this form just for the sake of delivering me, and he allows me to dress him. How kind he is. The personal feature of the Lord. Those who are impersonalists, they cannot appreciate worshiping the personal form of the Lord. They cannot relish the satisfaction of doing personal service to the deity. Those who are worshiping the universal form, for example, they can't understand either. They can't give a garland to the universal form. How many flowers you have to, strip every bush and tree in all of Australia, and still you couldn't encircle his neck. He's so big. What to speak of feeding him? Gopals will go bankrupt. So, he's so kind, and although he is so huge, although he is God, Almighty God, the source of all creation, from whom all the universes are coming, he agrees to be present in a nice form as Radha, and to accept our clothes that we sew for him, our garlands, our devotion, our prayers. This is the mercy of Krishna. He is the biggest of all, and the smallest of all. He can enter within an atom, and yet he takes this perfect size just to accept our service. So the more we understand the glories of the Lord, the more attached we feel. Just like when someone hears when you love someone and then you hear them glorified, your heart swells with happiness to hear more and more about the glories of the person you love. But this will improve our devotion to understand very scientifically the existence of the Lord. It is not dry. Prabhupada said that it is not dry. He said, we, as devotees, we take as much interest in hearing the subjects of the Lord's manifesting the creation, the Lord's acting on the battlefields of Kurukshetra, as we do in hearing about his dancing with devotees. This is Prabhupada's wonderful vision of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, others might say, I just want to hear about the pastimes of the Lord. And relish more that rasa. But Prabhupada has given us the example in saying that all the activities of the Lord are equally worshipable. And he used to relish just as much every aspect, every passage of Bhagavatam. Not only the later passages, but the earlier ones as well, because of his vision of Krishna. One who sees Krishna, one who is Krishna conscious sees Krishna everywhere, expanded everywhere. Chaitanya Charitamrita said, doesn't exactly see the thing, he sees it in relationship to the Lord. In that sense, everything is connected with Krishna. What can you find within this world that is not the energy of the Lord? So this is the lesson that the Avadut Brahmin could understand from an insignificant creature like a spider. So similarly, we should also be very humble like the Avadut Brahmin and realize that everyone is my master. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was praying, and he said to his disciples, you are all my masters, because I am learning from all of you. So a humble devotee actually sees everyone as capable of teaching him. He is not so proud as to think that I know everything and everyone will benefit from my association. Rather, he thinks in the reverse, that I am not very significant and I will gain from others' association. So I'll stop here and ask if you have any questions or comments.
Maharaj, you're saying that because Krishna's body is transcendental, even in the material world when he comes, that therefore that's the difference between our body and Krishna's body, and that's proven by the most uncommon pastimes that he performs while he's here. But the materialists will just say that, well, that's exaggerated mythology. Many of the in India, they talk about Krishna's pastimes as mythology. It happened 5,000 years ago. It's outrageous that someone could marry 16,000 wives. So it seems so. The whole thing seems so outrageous. Krishna's lifting a hill with one little finger, and they put it in the category of mythology, and they say, well, you haven't got any proof, it's just maybe some folklore that's handed down. So, if we're using that as Krishna's uncommon pastimes, to prove his transcendental position, how do you suggest is the best way to convince them?
Well, for such persons, it may be best not to immediately discuss the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, which are considered to be very confidential. Therefore, we find that what was done by Srila Vyasadeva in the Bhagavatam is that he leads up to the pastimes. The pastimes are in the 10th canto, but he prefaces the 10th canto with 9 cantos to describe the power, and he establishes, in other words, the Godship, the Godhead. He establishes Krishna's position as God by showing how he's God, what are his powers, how does he create the material world, how is the material world formed, and with the help of Prabhupada's purpose, everything is established in a very logical, progressive way. So by the time someone comes to the 10th canto, he already understands that Krishna is the Supreme Lord. The God is, that the cause of all causes is a person. And the person has qualities, one of which is that his name is Krishna, he's a specific person. So by that time it becomes possible for them to hear the pastimes of the Lord. So, because Prabhupada says that if you try to understand God by comparing him to yourself, to an ordinary soul, it is impossible. So there's no way we can convince them on that level.
Therefore, devotees should not sensationalize Krishna's pastimes too much in speaking to the people.
No. Someone has to be.
Sometimes that happens.
If someone is to the point of understanding, if someone actually can understand that God exists, that there is God, if he's not an atheist, if he accepts the existence of God, and if he also can accept that God is a supreme person, then we should first of all establish clearly, get the person to agree that if he's a supreme person, that he can do unlimited things, that he is unlimited, that if you say he's limited, that he cannot do something, that you're immediately not, he's not God. So if they're so willing to accede to all of this, then you may describe some of the pastimes of Krishna. But if there's a hesitancy on their part, if there's a difficulty, then it's better not to. That's why you'll see, what is Prabhupada's main preaching when he deals with people? You are not your body. He doesn't even talk immediately about God. He talks about, and we've seen this in China, in our work in China, that in China, this is a perfect example. It really trains you how you have to teach and preach there to the materialists, because there's no question there of beginning with what's the speak of Krishna's pastimes. You can't begin with God. You cannot not even begin with the soul. You have to first of all just say you're not your body. Then what are you? Then gradually you have to logically prove there must be something that's not material, and that is the soul. And then the question is, what are the main qualities of the soul? Where does it originate from? Where does it go? Obviously, the body dies. If the soul has a quality of eternality, then what happens at death? Then gradually, you can build up what is the Supreme Soul. So, Prabhupada also was very careful in preaching to stress that we're not this body, that we are the soul, and that there is a relationship with God. But he withheld in most cases, in most purports, from describing the pastimes of the Lord until someone was actually qualified. Although there's no question that Prabhupada didn't know those pastimes, because when you read 10th canto, it's just the most nectar. And of course, Prabhupada did something extraordinary. He did something extraordinary and unique in giving the Krishna book. At the very outset, he gave the Krishna book, which is actually inconceivable how he did this. Because on the one hand, the Bhagavatam states that one has to proceed progressively through the first 9 cantos, and yet Prabhupada presented Krishna book for the whole world. And he even said people who are lusty would give up their lusty desires reading about Krishna. So he had the ability to, but Krishna book is filled continuously with philosophy. Again and again, every time there's some extraordinary event, Prabhupada reminds the reader that we're not talking here about, please understand who Krishna is. For him it is not impossible to do this thing which is now being described. Can you add something further on this point, perhaps?
No, it's Krishna's got inconceivable potency. Unless a person accepts that, then you can't.
Yeah, that's right. Unless a person accepts God's inconceivable potency, you can't really start to disclose them.
Are the eternally conditioned souls an aspect of Krishna's nature? And second question, if Krishna knows the past, present and future, then are we destined to, does he know our rules or not?
Everything is part of Krishna's nature, including the living entities. Ignorance is also coming from Krishna. Ignorance is the cause of our misuse of our free will. So that is also part of Krishna's nature. And the fact that he knows the past, present, and future doesn't destine us to act in a certain way. We act according to our will. He may know what we're going to do. Just like you may see a drunk person and there's a bottle of wine in front of him, and you may know that he's going to pick it up and drink it, but you didn't cause him to do that just because you happen to have that knowledge. He has his own free will. Your knowledge didn't therefore mean that because you could understand ahead of time what he was going to do, that means you made him do it. So God may know the future because he knows our nature. But there's always a chance given by the Lord. He's always giving opportunities, just like now. He's giving everybody in this room the opportunity to go back to God. And how many of us will take it? He's giving everybody the opportunity, but how many of us will take it? Or can you say, you couldn't possibly blame Krishna if some of us don't. You know perfectly well it's our own obstinacy, our stubbornness, our unwillingness to control our mind and our senses and be Krishna conscious. It couldn't possibly be Krishna's fault. When Krishna knows the heart of each living entity, he knows every desire better than you know your desire. So naturally he knows what we're going to decide. You don't know satisfied. Do you want to ask why you ask?
It's something like if you know the nature of someone's personality, you know how he's going to act for a certain question or certain.
Yeah. He knows. He's the Lord within the heart. He knows all our desires. So he knows. Still, there's a factor of him sending his pure devotees. So by sending his pure devotees, this is the mercy factor of the Lord. This is another part of the Lord's nature. He's all merciful. And he extends that mercy by sending devotees throughout the creation. And by associating with those devotees, even though the one's nature is very sinful, they can completely turn around. Like Migrani the hunter was turned around by Narad Muni. In a sense, we can say that we also were like that. Our nature was sinful, but by associating with Prabhupada, we were turned around. Just by contact with the mercy feature or mercy nature of the Lord, his devotee, what was apparently going to take place did not take place. We were going to proceed into sinful life, and yet we were turned away from sinful life by the association of the Lord's devotee. So that's also his nature. Everyone is free to do as they like. Milk normally is very healthy, but when a serpent drinks milk, it turns it into poison. That's the nature. The serpent is envious by nature. So he takes life-giving milk and turns it into poison. So because of envy of the Supreme Lord, some people who are professionals, they take the Bhagavatam and they use it for their own poisonous purposes, making money, instead of giving the real benefit of the Bhagavatam, which is to give eternal life. So hearing the Bhagavatam from such a person, you will not get the Bhagavatam. You will not get eternal life. You will get poison. You will not get Krishna. You will become an impersonalist. So it's very dangerous to hear the Bhagavatam or the holy name chanted from the lips of such professional people who are invariably impersonalists. Therefore, we have to be certain that we hear from someone in parampara and not otherwise. Unless the person is a bona fide parampara, and unless he himself is a practicing devotee, it is better not to hear. This is another danger. That's why, as far as possible, we should hear from advanced devotees. Because if a person who is a materialistic devotee teaches the Bhagavatam, and he puts his materialistic ideas into the purport or explanation, and the result is that the entire, it's called Mishra Jnana Bhakti, everything becomes mixed with all kinds of impure motivations. Hearing from a materialistic person is the same. A person is a professional. Now, you see, we think the professional Bhagavatam speakers are people who come from India, but they can be right in our own movement sometimes. Because if someone has got other motives besides loving Krishna, and he speaks in the Bhagavatam, then the result will be the people who hear from him will become affected, and they will be infected with material desires by hearing from such a person. Therefore, we have to be very careful to associate with those who are pure devotees. Pure devotees means whose only motivation is to serve Krishna, not who have other motives mixed in. Otherwise, it is very dangerous to have their association. Simply by their association, your material desires will become fed and increased. Because they'll use the Bhagavatam for ulterior purposes, not for giving Krishna. People do that. We see that even within our movement. That sometimes happens. People use this movement, they use the philosophy, they use the holy name, they use devotional service for impure motives.
You said in your beginning of the class that you can't approach Krishna if sin is there. And last night you were explaining that sin is any activity which is not performed in Krishna's service. So even in other religious faiths, there are people that I've met who are still very sincere, and they believe in God, and they pray to God, and they may even be very experienced, and some of the nuns. But due to misdirection, they don't know actually that some of the activities they are performing are sinful. Is it true, I've heard from some of the devotees who was discussing with Sahaj Maharaj, that for these people who are very sincere, the karmic reaction is actually put on hold?
Well, Prabhupada says that regarding the destination of the devotees of Lord Jesus, the best that they can attain is the higher material planets. They can't go back to Godhead. This is stated in the letter to Bhagavan Das in March of 1970. March 1970. March 1970, letter to Bhagavan. Prabhupada says that the devotees of Jesus can go at best to a higher material planet within this universe. They cannot go back to Godhead. Very categorically states this.
The Lord's brother out in heaven.
Yeah, he said the heaven that they're talking about, the heavenly planets, is not the spiritual world. So, it's described that one who goes to the heavenly planets, their karma is put on hold. That's why they can go up there. But when they use up the result of their good karma, etc., then they have to come back again into this material world. It's not very often that they go forward. And at least the Bhagavad Gita says that after using it up, after so many years, then they come back. Although there are cases also where one becomes progressive in the heavenly planets and could proceed to the spiritual world from there. Does that answer your question? Want to ask something more?
Well, I was just thinking that, obviously a lot of these people, they're not into karma yoga, because karma yoga is like they perform activities for fruit of result. Prabhupada
points out also in that letter that the main thrust of their religion is to give up sinful activity, not to develop love of God. The main emphasis is to stop sinning. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet. These are the Ten Commandments. These are the main principles. This is not the main principles of our religious teaching. So their main thing is to get people to be human, to stop sinning. But to be godly, that requires Krishna consciousness. So the main thrust is to stop sinning. Another time, in any case, these persons gradually will come to Krishna consciousness if they're sincere. That's what Prabhupada told us. We asked him, what about someone who's a sincere Christian? He said that then they will become Hare Krishnas like all of you. You are sincere Christians. A sincere Christian gets to the point where he stops killing. Ignorance is never taken as an excuse. If someone is still killing, it means that in the past there's still sinful activities. I don't care whether they're called saint this or so and so and given. It doesn't matter. They can be given a Nobel Prize. It doesn't make them a saint. If they're killing animals, it means that in the past they're still very sinful. But they haven't gotten free from those sinful actions. Now they're getting tremendous good karma. Therefore, they'll go to the heavenly planet. But they cannot, but there's no question going back to God, it will still killing animals. That killing animals is a sign of ignorance. It means they don't even understand the most basic philosophy of the soul and reincarnation. So in such gross ignorance, how can you possibly think that they know who God is? They don't. They don't even understand the nature of the self, what is free from the Supreme Self. So we have to be able to distinguish between transcendental activity and piety. Generally, what is considered to be Christian, sign of Christian compassion is piety. It's not transcendental action. Transcendental action relieves ignorance. It doesn't simply relieve material distress. That we discussed last night. Atonement and other things can temporarily mitigate material distress. You can open up hospitals, you can feed the poor, but that won't stop the person from becoming poor in his next life again. It won't stop the person from again having a material body, and which again gets ill. So taking care of lepers, feeding people, this is material piety. It is not necessarily transcendental.
The main thrust of their religion is piety and giving up sinful activities. Then if they're not developing love of God, then it's actually impossible to give up the sinful activity. Krishna says, you shut up and today, but unless you experience a higher taste, you can't actually give up the sinful activities anyway.
That's true, not on a permanent basis. Just as one who goes to the heavenly planets falls down again. Unless they get the association of the pure devotee. Unless their piety brings them to the point, which is what piety very often does, of getting associated with a pure devotee, then they become Hare Krishna. We're all formerly Christians, so now we become Hare Krishna. So that piety does serve the purpose of giving them the benefit of leading to the association of the devotees of the Lord. So it's not a waste of time, that piety. In fact, it's that in the Vedas, amongst the Hindus, this is the system. The Vedas also teach material piety, with the idea that gradually it will qualify someone for association with the devotee. Although a devotee's association is certainly not limited to those who are pious, he can give his association to all, and he does. But one of the things that does come about as a result of material piety is that one gets associated with a pure devotee, a person who has no material motivation.
You mentioned fire is spiritual. And is that why it is so prominent in Hindu religion?
What is it? Is what prominent?
Fire.
Fire.
Spiritual.
No, I didn't. I was using that as an example. That fire, if you put a piece of iron into fire, it develops the qualities of fire. In the same way, when material things are used in service of God, they develop a godly quality. It was an example only.
Still, can you elaborate on fire and...
Yeah, fire in Hindu, in the Vedic culture, the householders are told to worship the fire. They have a fire burning in the household, which is always burning. And by offering to the fires to the sun god. And the idea is that when the sun god is pleased, then he performs the function of evaporating water from the ocean into the form of clouds. Clouds are water evaporated by the heat of the sun and stored the water is stored in the clouds, and then it's sent down as rain. And from the rain, grains grow. And these grains produce blood and semen. And from that, one becomes strong and can procreate. So this is a system of material prosperity dependent upon pleasing the sun god. Therefore, in the Vedic culture, they were doing this. However, in Krishna conscious culture, which is transcendental, it is the summum bonum, the topmost aspect of Vedic culture. Simply by pleasing Krishna, all the gods, the demigods they're called, they're all pleased. So you don't have to separately worship the fire or the sun god. You simply worship the Supreme Lord of all, God Himself, and all others are pleased automatically.
You're going like straight to the top.
Right, straight to the top. That's right. That's right. Instead of walking up the stairs, we would take the lift immediately to the top.
About the last question, what about someone like Saint Francis of Assisi who saw God everywhere? When Srila Prabhupada came to Melbourne, he went and saw those monks and said that was one's first class God consciousness. What would happen to him?
Yes, if he's following purely like this, then he's a transcendentalist. Sometimes there may be transcendentalists. But also I think he may be transcendental, but we should also understand that when Prabhupada speaks in different places and in different circumstances, that he does so in different times and places. I mean, take it that he was speaking also to a group of people. And he said, Jesus is our guru, and they asked him. And listen to those tapes. So, I can't exactly say what the final destination of Francis of Assisi is, but obviously it would appear that he was not sinful. So if someone is not sinful, then they're more qualified to understand God. But that doesn't mean that he still understood the full science of God. It's the beginning. To be free from sinful life is a qualification for understanding about God. It does not necessarily mean that one has understood. Just like we say that to be free from the sins, offenses of chanting, qualifies you for chanting purely. It is not the same. There are 3 stages of chanting: offensive, clearing, and pure. So offensive is like sinful. It means committing sins. Clearing means where the sins have ceased. And pure is where you're actually experiencing love of God. So whether or not, St. Francis experienced love of God is hard to say. But we can certainly say that his activities seem to indicate that he was free from that sinful nature. So he was a good candidate for loving God. If, in fact, he had not achieved love of God, at least he was a good candidate. But amongst those persons that I was preaching to, so he has to encourage them at a certain point for speaking. Other questions? Yes?
The soul goes to the heavenly planets. Is there any chance for that soul to take up the onward journey, or is it a definite return?
No, it can be like that sometimes, because there are pure devotees that go there also. The persons like Narad Muni and other associates are also traveling in the heavenly planets, and they're also preaching there, the glories of the Lord. However, the situation in the heavenly planets is so opulent that it becomes difficult to convince someone to take up devotional service in your sphere, because they feel like they're already in that heavenly situation, enjoying. That's why Queen Kunti prays Janmaishvarya Shri Shri. She says Krishna is a Kinshan Bocha. Krishna is approached by those who are materially exhausted. So people on the heavenly planet are not materially exhausted. They are materially enlightened. Bhogaishvaya, they're into enjoyment and opulence. So when someone is into enjoyment and opulence, the determination for devotional service is very difficult to cultivate. So generally it's said that one who goes to the heavenly planets returns again to this material world. But there are instances, certainly, where it's possible to be progressive. Just like the four Kumars, they were progressive. They were situated in the topmost, higher planets, and they were progressive to go back to Godhead. So it can be done. But, we should not think like that, well, I'll attain a heavenly planet by doing punya. Because anyway, to do punya in this lifetime is very difficult. To take that karma kanda process in this Kali Yuga is impossible. Harinatha Thakur says, karma kanda is not possible in Kali Yuga. The system of karma kanda is practically impossible. It's so sinful now that you just can't even do karma kanda activity in the right way. The only religious system left in the Kali Yuga is the holy name of the Lord. Everything else becomes overwhelmed by materialism and sinfulness, except the holy name.
Why God created a man who doesn't realize his sinful activities?
No, God did.
Particularly during time in his teenage.
No. You got this is not right. God did not create man in ignorance. Man became in ignorance. Just like a father trains his child, and then the child still does something wrong. Is it the father's training that made him do wrong, or was it the child's independent choice? God created us with the choice. He didn't make us ignorant. He creates us with the freedom to choose. We may choose, but He doesn't make us ignorant.